All right. Hi, guys. Today, Brian and I are here with Dr. Teralyn Sell. She is a psychotherapist and a brain health expert, and she's here to talk to us today about some fun stuff, anxiety and mental health. Hi,
So
Dr. Teralyn. How are
fun.
you?
I'm good. I try to keep the conversation fun, even though it can be a heavy conversation, at some point. So it's good to infuse a little humor now and again. So hopefully we'll do that today.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, no problem there.
Yeah.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Well, I am actually in Wisconsin, and my work as a mental health therapist and addiction therapist, that's where I originally started. I actually started working in the prison system. I worked with the most mentally ill inmates in the state of Wisconsin, which gave me some pretty extreme training. So when I went into private practice, people are like, "I'm probably the worst client you've ever had." I'm like, "You have no idea." Like, you want to see mental illness, work in a prison for a minute and a half and you will see it. So what I noticed after working there and being in private practice is that what I was doing just didn't feel enough. People were struggling harder and harder, getting more medication like stacked on top, and nobody was paying attention to anything else except for medication and like thoughts. And I started thinking, I understand the whole thought process and creating new neurological pathways through the power of thought and challenging and things like that. But I couldn't help someone do that when they're literally on the couch, like shaking,
Mm-hmm.
when they're having an episode or they're so depressed, they can't even get out of bed. Like, so I started thinking like, there has to be something more. And don't get me wrong, I was a good steward to a psychiatrist. I was like, go back, get your meds checked, maybe change them, because I felt so stuck. And then when I really dove into studying the brain and what we can actually naturally do to influence our mood and influence our own neurotransmitters and neural pathways, I was hooked. And it's one of these things like you can't unlearn things now. Like, if I don't bring this to the table, what am I doing? So now I focus a lot on nutrition, food, amino acid therapies, omega fatty acids, all of these things I bring to the table for my clients and anyone else who wants to listen. So hopefully somebody that's listening today will be like, I think I need some of that. Yeah.
So, I was going to bring this up later, actually, because I read a little bit about it, but I think it's pretty relevant now. I kind of feel like we live in a society where, we, like you say, we throw pills at things and we, just try to medicate everybody for that quick fix. But, your approach is, like you said, more holistic. So, at what point do you see people, like, is there a line? There's got to be a line, right, between like someone who actually needs some sort of medication and someone who doesn't. And do you feel like we're just jumping to medicate instead of dealing with that problem? And at what point is that? What point is that person might need something?
That's a really good point, and it's a tough line. I don't think there is a definitive line, right? It's kind of about where the person wants to be. So a lot of my clients that I get they're either two things, like they know that they're struggling, but they don't want to try medication because of what they've heard or seen in their own families, or their kids are just too little and they don't want to go down that route, or they've been on it for 10, 15, 20 years and they want off. That's really the two types of people that I see. And the problem is that, if you've been on an antidepressant or something like that for 20 years, your brain has changed a lot, and you might need to stay on a low dose for a while, or the titration, which is the reduction of medication, might take 2 years. But if you go to your doctor, they're going to get you off of it in a couple of months, and that's not the doctor's fault. That's just the way the medication is made. They can't prescribe it to cut or things like that. So the line is really this: like, I'm willing to try anything with my clients if they're on board. I never push, you should get off of that, or what I say is, like, the constellation of symptoms that you might be experiencing could be a direct result of being on this medication for so long. And that is a real conversation that more people need to have. Sometimes the side effects are worse than actually not being on the medication. Now, if someone is struggling and suicidal and things like that, I will bring in the supports of a psychiatrist or something like that in the immediate to get them feeling better right now, while we also influence with holistic means and things like that. So the two things can exist together. And I'm not a proponent of medication. There's a time and a place, but I'm more a proponent for less is more often, and let's support you holistically on the other side too. So I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah,
there's no definitive line. It's really,
right.
Getting the client to understand what they need and where they are in their journey. And if someone comes in and is like, I've been suicidal for a year and I want off these medications I've been on for 20 years, I'd be like, let's work with you for 3 to 6 months nutritionally first and see where that takes you, and then revisit the conversation. I'll never say, I don't think that's a great idea. I'll be like,
right.
All right, let's preemptively do these things so that when you do feel better, we have a path to work on, like a map.
It's interesting too, because it really seems based on the individual, the approach you're taking, right? First,
always.
When people prescribe medicine, they go, okay, this is what works and it should work for so-and-so. And maybe it's based on weight or size or age or things like that, but they're not really going, what's the difference in this actual human being between this, between this person and this other person over here? And they're just prescribing out the medication.
Well, we know a lot more about things like neurotransmitters and genetic mutations and things like that I wish psychiatry's line of defense would be at least a genetic test to find out, how does your body metabolize serotonin? Because the traditional line of defense for depression would be like an SSRI, which impacts your serotonin. But if your body holds on to serotonin, you're going to feel just as depressed and anxious as a person who has no serotonin. So symptoms of imbalance are very similar, whether the neurotransmitters are low or high. So we don't know what everybody's body chemistry is doing. So I wish that the first line of defense would be some genetic testing at the psychiatrist office, but it's just not. That's why so many people fail on SSRIs. And fail meaning they either make you feel worse or you don't feel anything at all. Because our body chemistry, this is a great time to be in psychiatry. I wish it's the only field though that doesn't like pop open the hood and look at things, right? If you go to the ER because you think you have a broken arm, you never walk in and they give you a symptom checklist and say, well, how bad does it hurt? 0 to 10. Is it bent funny? Is it whatever? They look and they go, let's take an x-ray.
Yeah.
Let's look inside. Let's do an MRI to see how bad it is. In psychiatry, you walk in and you're like, okay, I feel sad. I feel depressed. I feel irritable, whatever. You have depression. It must be your serotonin. Here's a prescription.
Separate my shoulder once and
they didn't. They just popped it back in and sent you on your way.
Yeah.
And my friends tried to put it back in.
Your friends. That's the first problem right there.
I went to the ER.
Yeah.
Take your blood pressure, and they want to put the thing on the arm that's dislocated. I'm like
what?
It's like, no.
It's silliness. That is silliness. What we're seeing now too is that serotonin isn't always the neurotransmitter to look at. Dopamine is huge. So if you have dopamine and cortisol, like those are huge hormones and neurotransmitters to take a peek at if you're feeling depressed. So, or even anxious. Typically I have a lot of people coming in their like middle age, like 30, 40, whatever. My middle age, now, as I get older.
Middle age? Come on.
As my middle age gets older, I look at all of you guys as middle age because I don't want to be old. But anyway.
It does get older.
It does.
I'm not aging. good.
but your lives are stressful. You know, there's a lot happening. And so when you come in and you're like, I just feel this like depressive fatigue, right? Like hard to keep my eyes open. My forehead always feels heavy. That's more of a dopamine problem than anything else. Once you lift that with things like tyrosine, you know, or even stabilizing your blood sugar, you're going to feel a lot better energetically. So throwing an SSRI at that problem isn't going to fix it.
Well, let me ask you, what do those tests entail? I mean, they exist, right? You can do some sort of genetic testing for these things,
It's so
right?
easy. Yeah. It's a cheek swab usually.
Wow.
So it's an easy thing. I don't understand why it's not more accessible. And it could likely be because doctors aren't well versed in it, you know, so they're not going to do something. And also, I hate to say this, but insurance companies kind of rule the earth. So if they don't put the seal of approval on it, it's not going to happen.
Right.
So I have a feeling that eventually they will, but you know, I use cortisol labs in my office all the time. I use neurotransmitter labs in my office all the time. These are functional labs that are available to the public. And they work, they're good. But again, it's a hard thing to get anybody to look at because it's so different. But I think we still in psychology, like we still think of people like Freud as ruling the world, you know? And I'm like, well, okay, that's fine. But what does Freud have to do with your neurotransmitters or your genetic coding? Really? Like we have such bigger opportunity in the world of psychology that we're just not grabbing a hold of yet. You know, I think there's going to be a switch. There has to be a switch. I think people are yearning for something different out of psychology.
So one of the things that you do is take that holistic approach. Can you tell us a little bit about what your strategies are there?
Yeah. So, I mean, my strategy is just what I talked about. Like I can look at genetic coding, but my biggest strategy is because genetic coding tells you why something is happening, right? It tells you what your body is doing. I like to know what is happening. So I do neurotransmitter and cortisol labs to look at stress hormones and neurotransmitters, you know, dopamine, serotonin, GABA, whole body amounts. Because what we know is that your neurotransmitters don't just live in your brain. They live in your whole body. You know, they're everywhere. So that's usually what I start with. And that gives us an awesome roadmap to recovery. And I do that for anybody that's feeling bad, you know, whether they're like, I'm depressed or anxious, or just like, I feel blah, you know, I just feel yucky. You know, I don't feel like myself.
Right.
I'll do those labs for them and literally put together a protocol that has to do with nutrition. And I use a lot of amino acid supplementations. Now, people out there who are in the bodybuilding world, they've been using amino acids forever to build muscle, right? So I just take what's already on the market and use it for your brain. It's not difficult. It's not difficult. You just have to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So now food, you know, I was reading something on your website about, you know, recipes for mental health and things like that. You know, how big of a role does food and what we put in our body in terms of nutrition play a role in our mental health?
Okay, there's two major important roles that, well, I'm sure there's more than two, but I'm going to give you two. The first one is stabilizing your blood sugar. And that is done with food, primarily protein. And I say that because there's a lot more to it. But the thing is, when people come into my office, they're feeling so crappy that if I were to say, here, take this recipe book and start making yourself all these fantastic foods and whatever, am I going to get any results from that? No. But if I say, listen, every 3 hours, eat some protein. If you can't eat it, drink a pre-made shake. We're going to start there. That's good enough. You know, if your blood sugar is stabilized throughout the day, your emotional health will also become more stable. Right. Everybody knows.
Brian knows. I'm not kidding you. He walks around. We went to the airport. He had a bar in his backpack because I'm a terrible human. And when I don't eat, I'm awful. So forget me a good human. I'm not.
Brian's like, I'm awful too down here. You know, it's really.
I'm one of those people, I can go without eating for, you know, days.
No, you can't. Trust me. Anyone around you will say you
Lies.
cannot.
Lies.
That's a lie you tell yourself.
Yeah, I can totally identify with that though.
Let me tell you why, Brian, and maybe this is going to make a little bit more sense to you. So when you're in low blood sugar, your body will begin to produce adrenaline. And when your body produces adrenaline, it shuts off your prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking brain, because it thinks it's being chased by a bear or some big threat. Yeah. So it's like off. So if you're being chased by a bear and you got to a fork in the road, should I go left? Should I go right? You don't have time to make a decision. The bear kills you, right? Yep. Right now, the only threat is low blood sugar, though. That doesn't even make any sense. Right? So if your thinking brain is off, you're going to do and say things you wish you wouldn't have said and done. For people in the mental health and addiction world, especially addiction world, that can mean relapse. You know, you can't access the tools you once had. You're just kind of going, you know, stabilizing that blood sugar will keep that thinking brain online. That's one thing.
It's interesting too, when I'm like really tired, like I've been working really hard, right? I always crave like fat, like cheese or like protein with fat. I crave fat. I don't know why.
Listen, I think intuitively our bodies know what they need.
Right.
So if your body's craving protein and fat, then give it to them. Good fat.
My body's craving ice cream 24/7, so I don't know what that means. But
you know, actually craving sweets is a symptom of neurotransmitter imbalance.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
You got
me. Or cortisol, stress stuff, you know, right. Exactly.
Nailed it.
Hashtag nailed it. Yeah. The second reason though, food is so important. Again, I'm going to go particularly proteins, and not a lot of people want to talk about this, but animal proteins are superior often for this, especially in the mental health and addiction world. There are some vegan options, but it's a little harder to get a complete protein. You have to be really good at it, you know. At the top of every neurotransmitter pathway is food. So let's say you need to make more serotonin, right? So you would choose foods that are higher in tryptophan. And you're looking at some dairies, eggs, meats, cheeses, you know, there's some nuts, pumpkin seeds, and things like that are at the top of that neurotransmitter pathway. Then tryptophan will produce serotonin, then serotonin will produce melatonin to help you sleep. But the other piece of this is what's called nutrient cofactors. And so in order for that chain to happen, top down, you're going to need vitamin C, your B vitamins, vitamin D, magnesium. Okay, so that's why food is the best source typically, but someone who works with me is typically not eating anything, or not eating good things, or hopped up on caffeine and sugar all day. So they're not getting all of the cofactors that they need, right? You're just not getting it. So supplementation is important in the mental health world too. And it can start with something as simple as a really good quality multivitamin, for real.
How important is, like, you know, because I mean, this is a personal question. Like, I'm very into B, you know?
You're what?
Vitamin Bs, like the vitamin Bs, like taking complex. Is that, because that actually makes me feel very, you know, it makes me feel good if I'm off it, you know, I feel, you know, a little, you know, not as much energy really.
Absolutely. Well, your B vitamins are part of that nutrient cofactor equation. They also help you fight stress. So that's probably why it feels better when you're on it, because I'm guessing you got a lot of stress. Right? But you know, your B vitamins, they're called water soluble. So you have to replenish them daily, which is why you have to keep taking the B vitamins to help you out with that. Mm-hmm.
How bad is when people eat, like, you know, fast food? Because I try to stay away from it completely, right? Like, you know, how bad is, you know, they're thinking they're eating beef in, like, say, a fast food hamburger. How bad is that really for them?
On your mental health, really. I mean, as opposed to what?
Well, okay. So if some is good, more is not better. We'll say that. You know, there are some better options that you can have even in the fast food world. And I'm going to get slaughtered for even saying that. But again, a lot of my clients, I'm looking at good enough You know, if you're eating at McDonald's, how about a salad, you know, or
Right,
some
right.
chicken or something like that. You know, there's good, better, and best, but I'm like good enough at this point. So,
Right, right.
you know,
Start
best
small.
would
I mean, baby
start
steps,
very
right?
small. But you can't undo a bad diet with supplementation. You can't undo a bad diet with medication either.
Do you think that's why so many kids have sort of refused? Yeah, sorry if I'm going
Let's
down.
talk about that. Yeah.
Because I actually, I mean, that's one of my things. I don't, believe they should be eating whatever, all this fast food. You should be cooking, we cook chicken and vegetables, and do you know what I mean? Just, really simple stuff, for them. And I just believe, I don't know. So you go down.
I'm going to go down the kid route because I'm super passionate about brain health for kids. Especially when I see like some of the climbing rates of medication usage for behavior is in little kids, like 3-year-olds. You know, I'm on these forums on Facebook and they're like, my 3-year-old is acting crazy. I think they need medication. And I'm like, really, you're gonna change the architecture of your baby's brain because you're not stabilizing the blood sugar there? I mean, honestly, in kids, stabilizing blood sugar, what does fast food do? Destabilizes blood sugars, right? Carbohydrates, sugars, like all the crappy stuff. Like you're talking about blood sugar dysregulation all the time. When you think about even like kindergarten, right? So they wake up in the morning and they eat sugary cereals or something. And then they haven't eaten. Then lunch comes and it's what, chicken nuggets or something, nothing great, right? So that might be their only protein for the day. And then they get home and then they eat dinner at 5 or something like that. And they might have more protein there. So if we think about that whole protein every 3 to 4 hours, so the last protein that kid had would be probably dinner time and then lunch the next day, and they're destabilizing with sugary foods because that's the only thing they'll eat. And when I see these kids on, your stimulants, Adderall, Ritalin, all that kind of stuff, that also decreases their appetite. So they're not wanting to eat. So then they're not impacting their neurotransmitter pathway or blood sugar. They're running on 0 all day, expecting a medication to do all the heavy lifting instead of expecting nutrition to do the heavy lifting. So when I work with a kid in school or a parent, that's the first thing I tell them is push for protein snacks throughout the day. And once they do that, they're like, I can't believe they had a really good day. I'm like, no kidding. No kidding. I don't just say that fun. And it's so easy. It's not hard. This stuff is not hard. And so when you talk about recipes, I'm a terrible cook. I hate cooking. I hate it. The easier, the better. I share recipes because some people really enjoy cooking. I don't. If it's quick, if it's easy, like I prep chicken, so I've got chicken to grab all week. That's easy. Takes an hour, So I'm not a huge chef or anything like that because I also know that if I like simple things, there's a whole bunch of people out there that like it too, and won't do all the extreme cooking that some people do or all the extreme food prepping. They just won't. They don't have it in them to do it. They don't have time. They don't like it. So again, keep it simple. And if you're going to go through a drive-through, be selective. My kid actually works at, we'll just say something with an arch. And I asked him, I said, what's the best thing to eat there? What is if you had to pick one good, and he actually said, it was the 1/4 pounder because it's fresh beef. Didn't know that. It's not frozen. I was like, well, that's interesting. I mean, obviously I don't know the quality of beef or grass-fed. It's not grass-fed, I'm sure. But I'm like, And he goes, and all you need to do is order it without a bun. They'll make it like that. I'm like, what? So,
Wow.
I mean, yeah, right. Who knew? So, I mean, just ask. Getting rid of things like gluten is hugely powerful in mental health world now.
Yeah. Let's talk about gluten for a second. Sorry.
Oh, geez. I go down these rabbit trails and then I expect you not to ask, but go ahead.
Well, gluten allergies. I mean, I didn't even know what gluten was until 4 years ago, right? Now everyone has gluten allergies. It's not like they just started shoving gluten in stuff, or is it like why are we seeing so much, or are we just more educated at this point of how bad it is?
We don't know what we don't know. So I quit gluten, I think I'm moving in on 3 years now. I had no idea it would impact me. I did it just to see. Right. I was like, you know what's all this? I'm just going to pull it out. See, again, that wasn't hard either. It wasn't hard. Like if you eat whole foods, it's not difficult to eliminate gluten, really. So I did it for 6 months, and then I put it back in, and I started experiencing this weird fatigue, like this brain fog fatigue. And I thought, couldn't be. I was expecting a stomach thing, like a, intestinal distress, whatever. That's what I was expecting. So I was like, couldn't be, but I took it back out again for a couple more weeks and tried it again. In 24 hours, fatigue again. And I thought, oh my goodness, like I can't believe this. What I realized without the gluten was I had more natural energy without it. But if you're living in a state of fatigue or low energy or brain fog, that becomes your normal. So until you move some of that stuff out and you're like, wow, I actually don't feel terrible.
That's what the world looks like.
Right. Well, it's tough. So I don't know that gluten is in a lot of foods, and I think we do pour gluten down our throat, and I'm in Wisconsin, so gluten is in a lot of alcohol up here. And, you're literally just like pouring it in. Again, you don't know what you don't know until you take something out and notice how different you might feel. And for me, it was a 24 to 48 hour after I eat the gluten, really strong fatigue that I never realized I had. And now it's so bad if I eat the gluten, if I happen to eat gluten, and I'm like taking naps all day, it just gets so tiring for me. And then I'm like, I think I had gluten somewhere. Who poisoned me? Just kidding. I probably did it myself,
Chicken.
Yeah. So I just, I don't strive for perfection with that. And it's not like celiac where it's down to the molecular level. I can have an exposure, but as long as I'm not eating noodles and breads and all of that stuff, like I'm not going to have that fatigue. So do I think it's, like a fad diet? I really don't, because I think we are more sensitive to things than we know, but because we live in it every day, we don't realize how bad it is.
So one of the things you mentioned, you said like when you have gluten, it takes like say 24 hours, right? For that.
For me.
For you, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you eat, so I guess my question is like when you introduce like say some sort of drug that's not going to work well with someone's brain or some, food even, right? Whatever that can, how long does it take? Can it be days to get out of the system? Is it, do you know what I mean? And I'm assuming it depends on the person, but how long can something like that affect you? That like especially when we're talking about kids, if you feed them whatever fast food and they'll be crazy for 2 days or whatever the case is, just off that. Does it affect people for long periods of time sometimes?
You mean like if you eat one thing, how long will it affect you?
Yeah. I guess that's what. I guess that's what I'm sort of asking. I guess if you do it on a regular basis, it's probably just continual, right?
Yeah. So if you think about sugar, like sugar can have an almost immediate impact on somebody, really quickly. Caffeine can too. So I'm going to use caffeine as an example because most of us drink caffeine at some point, right? Some of us drink large amounts of caffeine all the time.
IV caffeine over here.
IV, put it right in your vein. I always joke because I love coffee. And so I post coffee memes and do all this stuff. I drink 1 to 2 cups of coffee a day. But I think people think I drink gallons of it because I love it. But I've had to pull back. I used to drink a lot of it. But it has a half-life. Okay, so you drink a cup and it has a half-life to get out of your system. So if you drink 1 cup of coffee, it is still in your system by the next day, a little bit, and then we're doing it all over again. So it's never fully flushed. So it ends up with like this cumulative effect. And so I would guess, and this is a big guess, like food has similar qualities, right? So it has these half-lives. And again, body metabolism based on age, stage of life, size, whatever, and how much you're doing it, eating it that's gonna make a difference on how quickly it gets out of your body. So it's a tough, I don't really have a strong answer to that, except, things can stick around for a while.
Just to talk about caffeine for a second, but I really want to talk about anxiety before we wrap up. But, I think, caffeine is so, it is so powerful on, look, I know there's stuff out there, there's, you get headaches or this or that, there's all these symptoms associated with caffeine withdrawal, but it is so powerful that, like, sometimes for me personally, for example, when I got pregnant with my son, I was smoking cigarettes and drinking lots of coffee. And so when I had to get rid of those two things, I actually found, and don't get me wrong, I hated giving up the smoking, but the coffee was harder. It was so much harder. It was this constant headache, this constant, and yes, I was pregnant, but even if I make it a day now, just by chance, it's this constant not feeling good. And there are so many people that I talk to who cut coffee out of their life, and now they have way more energy than when they were drinking coffee all the time. And sometimes I'm like, I wonder if maybe I could ever go there, but I'm not quite ready for that.
Well, coffee dampens your adrenal function. And your adrenal function is where your cortisol is produced, which kind of wakes you up in the morning, gets you perky, right? Like, some people can just jump out of bed and they're like, yay, I'm not one of those people. But if we have low morning cortisol, and that's when you usually will grab your coffee right away, like start chugging it down just to get that energy, you're actually dampening your adrenal function even more. Okay, so you're going to have less energy over time. Yeah. So one thing to consider, again, we're going to go down the good enough path on this one, is to just, give your body 1 to 2 hours to wake up first before you drink coffee. Allow your adrenals to do the work first and then enjoy the coffee. Not take it for the stimulant effect, right? Water. The other thing you can do to get those adrenals pumping is to wake up, and within 5 minutes of waking up, do a bunch of squats. Or jumping jacks for like 3 to 5 minutes. Simple, easy. It's not like you have to work out for an hour, but just that to get things going, and then wait that hour and go get your coffee. Again, what we're doing is trying to stimulate your body to do what it's supposed to do from the inside out,
I'm going to let Nicolette, I have one question about physical activity. How much does that play a factor in your mental health?
Oh, a ton, an absolute ton. But there's a thing called overdoing it, which then would have an inverse effect, right, on your mental health, especially if you have cortisol issues. If you over exercise and you already have this cortisol fatigue, right, adrenal fatigue problems, you're going to probably make it worse. So if some is good, more is not better again. So everything in moderation is the key. And that's tough because you have to learn what your moderation is.
All right. Can we talk about anxiety real quick?
Yeah.
Because I'm done. So I wanted to, look, everybody is claiming that, at least to me, from what the people that I know, everybody claims that they have anxiety. I don't know. I just know a lot of anxious
buzzword.
Everybody's anxious. Everybody has anxiety. Now, are there, the first part of this question is, are there any trends that you're seeing amongst your patients when it comes to anxiety? Anything that's happening that's different than before, but also, is anxiety and being anxious different than that, like severe anxiety attack, like in a panic attack? Is there something like just being anxious as a human and suffering from anxiety?
Yeah, I believe so. And like what you were saying, the word anxious, even the word depressed, actually, they're huge buzzwords now because mental health is coming to the forefront of conversations, which is a good thing, but it's also not a good thing because we interchange clinical words with non-clinical experiences. Like, I have test anxiety. Well, Do you, or is it just a little bit normal to feel anxious before a test, right? To be stressed out or worried or concerned. So I like to work a lot with people on, if you feel anxious, tell me about what emotions that means to you, and separating that out. So it's not just one big bucket of anxiety. So there is clinical anxiety, there is clinical depression, and then there's your normal everyday experiences of stress and worry and fatigue and tiredness and sad or grief that's not clinical depression or clinical anxiety. But this is the trend that I see, more and more people coming in using these buzzword languages around mental health to normalize the experience. I'm like, but when you do that, you go to your doctor and you tell them that you have anxiety and these are the things, what are you going to walk out with? A prescription. And or you can come and see someone like me and walk out with some lifestyle tweaks that we can do easily that might change the whole thing. I mean, I did, even clinical anxiety experiences can be changed, reversed, done with by making life decisions. My whole story with anxiety is when I was working for the state, ended up in the tail end of my career, crippled with anxiety. Like I couldn't do it anymore. And I had panic attacks all the time driving home. And I remember coming home one day and just said to my husband, I got to quit. I can't do this to myself anymore, because it was either take medication and stay in the job or quit and live a good life. And I was like, I'm done. I'm not going to medicate myself. And it was like an immediate relief, So people are like, well, you didn't really have anxiety. I'm like, yes, I did. I just decided to change what I could change and control what I can control. Not everything needs to be dampened by a pill. And that's the message I want people to know. Like, your life is worth changing and living. That's it. So
I agree. I think a lot of people are afraid to make life changes, like that.
Scary.
It's way easier to just throw a pill at it, less work, right?
That's what we are led to believe. I mean, we get comfortable in our own stuckness. It's like that frog in the boiling pot of water. If you put a frog in a pot of water and you turn the stove up on the heat, the frog will not jump out when it gets to a certain temperature. It will stay there and boil to death. That's what we do in our lives. We get comfortable boiling, and we don't know when to jump out of the pot. So I think a lot of this is just learning how to jump out of the pot, that we don't have to stay in there. It's an option to be in there, but it's a scary option. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yes, definitely. Is there anything that you're working on currently that you'd like to tell us a little bit about before we wrap up?
I am. This is the most exciting thing I've ever worked on in my career. And so I'm the co-creator of Pro Recovery RX, and it is the first supplement line that is addressing mental health and addiction issues through pinpointed supplementation. So that is so exciting, because it's all based on brain health formulations that you're not going to find going to a normal big box retailer or whatever. Because, I've studied brain health to the nth degree. And so I put these formulations together, particularly for addictions and mental health. Yeah.
So let me ask you, who is the target user then? Is it, somebody who is currently caught in the grips of addiction, or somebody before they start, who is that for?
Well, it could be for anyone, really. So, I mean, if you feel like you're going down the path of addiction, or mental health too, it's not always addiction related, mental health as well. But, if you're somebody that's actually struggling to the point where it's dangerous, please seek help. Don't seek a supplement. Again, you got to know when that's the case too. But really an optimal time to start this would be very early in recovery, to really get your brain back online. So you're not white knuckling your way through the recovery process. You're actually building your brain back up, Same thing with mental health. From the moment that you think that you have anxiety or depressive symptoms, or even ADHD, like, start with this stuff, don't wait.
How young can the people be?
Well, so the supplement line is for adults. So if it were for youth, they would have to do some individual consultation to get the appropriate supplements. So,
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Where can all the people watching this find out more about you?
So there's two places. So look up prorecoveryrx.com, and that's the supplement line. And then so my personal website is Dr. Teralyn, DrTeralyn.com. And that's how you can find me. I'm also, you can find me, Dr. Teralyn, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm not on Snapchat because I just don't get it. Yeah. What?
Is it available now, the supplement?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is. And we've already received national attention for it. So it's pretty exciting.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us and answering all of our crazy questions, all of Brian's questions. I'm going to go have some coffee and eat some ice cream now. So
Me too.
Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Yeah.
Seriously, we love talking to people like you that are doing great things out there. And thank you for sharing that with us and everyone listening.
Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.